and that kind of stuff, and you have certain things you have to deal with, and you have to get them done before you die, hopefully, and all that sort of thing. So that is the concept of this. Now, so we've seen with the astronomical background as the astrological background. So what happened? Well, a terrible thing was happening. The sky was, the whole cosmos was slowly moving off its bearings. It was becoming unbalanced. We call it the precession of the equinoxes, but back then nobody knew what that was. What it meant was that, well, the axis of the Earth wobbles around once every 26,000 years. So that means that when the sun is in Aries, it's spring. Well, 2,000 years later, when the sun is in Pisces, it's spring. And so in Western astrology, they got away from using the sky and the stars as their macrocosm. Today, if you get an ephemeris for a Western astrology, for tropical astrology, which is based on the seasons, it says, well, I don't care where the stars are. It's the equinox now, so this is Aries. That's it, or something like that. That doesn't work. Vedic astrology, Hindu astrology works with the real sky, but Western astrology is really off because it slowly went down this path that Ptolemaic astrology took it. But basically, the whole cosmos was rolling off its bearings. There was a great deal of apocalyptic literature in the first century because people were very concerned that the world was coming to an end, because the pole star was changing, and with 300 years of astrological observation, it was clear that something was happening. The stars were not in the places they were needing to be, and things were wrong. And people expected there to be a destruction of the whole Earth, or the whole cosmos, and maybe a new Earth coming. And not just in Christianity and places like that. You find the Roman philosophers having visions of these things and so on. There's many of them you can learn about later. But Ptolemy consolidated astronomy and astrology into a format that would be based on what we call tropical astrology here in the West. It was going to be based on when the solstices and the equinoxes were. And that fixed Western astrology into that pattern, so that today we have the situation where when somebody tells you the sun is in Aries, no, it's not, it's in Pisces. You look up in the sky and see, you can't do it with the sun, but if they tell you the moon is in Aquarius, no, it's not in Aquarius. And that's one of the problems with modern Western astronomy, or astrology rather. It's not related to the real sky, the sidereal sky. So Ptolemy was a great writer who created the Almagest, did a lot of observations, and wrote the absolutely definitive work on astrology that was used in the West ever since. And it was based, everything that was done in the medieval period was based on the Almagest. I've read it in Greek, and that's how I first learned astrology when I was in graduate school a long time ago. And in classical Greek astronomy, the Earth is not flat. The Earth is a sphere. Parmenides had already proposed that in the 5th century before the Christian era. Aristotle proved from the curved shadows of the Earth on the moon during a lunar eclipse that the Earth had to be round or spherical in shape. Aristarchus had actually calculated the distances and sizes of the moon and of the sun from the Earth, and he was very close. This information was known by the pagan astronomers and astrologers. And they had done they just used trigonometry and some sticks they stuck in the ground and measured shadows and did things like that. They were just very smart guys. The Hindus did the same thing, by the way. Now we have Christianity. Christianity comes along, and the wiper-outer of paganism, the destroyer of all the ancient knowledge. Here is a fellow named Cosmas Indicopleustes, who is a Christian merchant who strongly declares in about the 4th century, pagan philosophers are wrong. The Earth is not round. The world is flat, and it's surrounded by a great ocean. This is common sense. I can see this. I travel from here to here, and I can see that the world is flat. And the celestial spheres turn around this flat world. This is common sense. So this plan, these are actually drawings of Cosmos Indicopleustes. In this drawing, this says Oceanos. It means it's a great ocean that surrounds all the land. That's because he lived in the Mediterranean, and he assumed that there was ocean everywhere. Nobody could go across that ocean. Columbus's sailors thought they were going to fall off the ocean and all that, you know. This is the land. This is the sky turning around the land, and this is where God lives up here. And this is what it looks like. And these are some kinds of drawings he made to show what the earth was like and what it was really, you know, would be. And then around it would be these spheres that would turn, the 7 signs of the zodiac and the planets and so on. And so we developed the Christian 3-storied universe. It's the basis of the whole medieval 3-storied universe, and this is the concept of macrocosm that competed with that of the mystery schools, and competed with that of the alchemists and the astrologers and the Rosicrucians and all these other people who got put in Inquisition prisons for believing the wrong stuff. Basic idea is that the earth is in the middle world. It's the church militant. And then in heaven is the church victorious, and that's where God lives and all the angels. And down below that is purgatory and hell. So it's a 3-storied universe. And this basic concept of cosmos was what was being done in medieval Christianity. And you either, after you died, you either went to heaven or you went to hell. No alternatives. You didn't get to stay here, that's for sure. So Aristotle and Ptolemy knew that they knew a great deal about the sky and stars, and Aristotle had proposed that the earth was spherical, but it didn't matter whether the earth was a sphere or was flat, because the basic shape of the astronomical universe was, you got the earth here, whether it's flat or whether it's spherical, doesn't matter, and then these things are all turning around it, and then the extreme empyrean, the chilum empyreum, this is the habitation of God, and the fire in the sky that nobody could stand in. Next to that is out at the outer level beyond the zodiac. So this was the kind of concept of universe that we had in the Western mystery tradition. Here's the earth, here's the sun, which goes around the earth, and the explanation for why it is that these planets like Saturn and Jupiter would sometime go stationary and then seem to go backwards, retrograde, and then go forward again, was that, well, as they went around the Earth with the sun and everything else, that they went around in epicycles. And so that was their explanation for that sort of a thing. And this became the basic concept then in the Western mystery tradition of what the Earth was like. You have the lower Earth. Now, remember, if you've taken the course in the Initiatic Mysteries, the lower earth was heaven back in the ancient days. The underworld was where heaven was. But now down here it's hell. And that's where all the bad gods live and everything. And then we have the earth, and then we have the elements. And there is an earthly paradise underneath the sphere of the moon. All beneath the sphere of the moon is called sublunary spheres. And many people felt that souls went to this sphere first before they went anywhere else. They were launched from here as the soul waxed and got larger and larger. That was more light, more souls coming into it. And then as it waned, they were leaving and they were going up to wherever they were going to go. That was Manichaeism and a lot of Christian ideas and things. And then finally, the sphere, the fixed stars, the zodiac, and the crystalline sphere, the primum mobile, the prime mover of the universe. This is a kind of the concept that was going on. Now, a lot of people don't realize how totally involved in astrology Judaism was, esoteric Judaism. It was learned from Zoroastrian priests during the Babylonian captivity in the 6th century before the Christian era, when the literate families of the Jews were taken in captivity to Babylon, leaving nothing but illiterate people over here who would later be known as Samaritans and things like that. And then eventually these people came back and took over this place, but not until they'd spent a couple of centuries, or sometimes just 1 century, interacting with this whole culture. And Jewish priesthood was very highly respected by the Zoroastrian priests, the Magi. And so there was a great deal of exchange that happened at that time. And two of the important things that were introduced into Judaism at that time were, number one was astrology. The other was the building trades, Freemasonry, stonemasonry. And if you trace the lineage of Jesus through his father that's given in the book of Matthew, you see it goes back to the first Jewish stonemason, who was Zerubbabel, who came from the Babylonian captivity. So Jesus' father was a stonemason. The word in the New Testament is tectone, which people translate as carpenter, but where Jesus lived there weren't no wood. There was rocks. And the kind of work they did was stonemasonry. And as you know, at the time of the captivity is when the book of Genesis was written. There are many other parts of the Old Testament that are way older than Genesis, but people like to think, oh, Genesis must be the oldest book in the Bible because it's the first one and it tells about the beginnings, but no, it's not. It's a very late one, and it was written by the priests after their contact with the Zoroastrians, and as a matter of fact, it was written specifically to set Judaism apart from the ideas of the Babylonians, who said the world was created in 7 days by the gods, plural, in the council, and the first human was made by the killing of a god, and the blood of a god went into this, and all that sort of thing. And the first day this happened, the second day this happened, and the Jewish priest says, well, no. So they said, okay, the council of gods, and light emanated from them, and then the council of gods separated things. And the Jewish priest said, no. In the beginning, they were just God.
It's Elohim, plural.
Yeah, well, that's why we still have the word Elohim, which is a plural in Judaism. But and God, light doesn't emanate from God. God speaks and says, "Let there be light," and the Word of God creates, and all this kind of stuff. So this stuff is given, and in that book, Genesis, is where we have the statements about the stars being given for signs' importance. It's an astrological influence. Well, that becomes more and more important in Judaism. I like Raphael Patai, who's a great Jewish scholar, because he has a lot of publications about Jewish alchemy and things that were completely anathema to an awful lot of Orthodox Jews for a long time, and now people have come to accept that, yes, in fact, this is an old tradition. I'm going to show you a short video about a synagogue in Syria that existed about the time of Jesus. These were Hellenized Jews, Hellenistic Jews. You see, the Jews had been forced out of Jerusalem in the beginning of the 2nd century and banned forever. And that began what was called the diaspora, where Jews had to live in other countries everywhere else. And there was already a Jewish diaspora. There had been ever since the Babylonian captivity, where huge colonies of Jewish people were living in Alexandria and other places like that, and they were speaking Greek and thinking in Greek and writing in Greek and knowing the philosophers and all this sort of thing. This is a synagogue that we find in a place in Syria called Dura Europos. I want to show you in a second with a little video. And you'll find all the Jewish symbols and the altar and everything there. But these people, for example, they portrayed the prophets in the white robes of the Greek philosophers. One of the most important of the first and earliest alchemist in Alexandria is Miriam the Jewess, who is spoken of by the later alchemists and so on. And Jews were considered to be great alchemists and astrologers and things like that. So we're going to see a video, a very short video, to show you what they found at this synagogue.
In 1932, archaeologists unearthed a 4th century synagogue in Israel. To their astonishment, they also unearthed something totally unexpected. In the very center of the temple, they found a beautiful mosaic of the zodiac. Its discovery baffled scholars who long believed that astrology was strictly forbidden in Judaism.
Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about the traditions of astrology in Judaism, there are some books you can get. This is by a rabbi named Glazerson. It's rather new. It's because the research is rather new, because people assume Orthodox and mainstream Judaism try to keep itself totally separated from any kind of occult arts. You can find publications that are in Israel about this. There's a lot of research. This is the Sefer Chachma Yisrael, Book of the Wisdom of Israel. And it's real scholarship, not just some kind of a New Age book. Here is a Byzantine mosaic. This is on a church from the Byzantine period. Notice that all the letters are in Hebrew. And that's because the Jews were expert in astrology, and there are astrological references throughout the Talmud from the earliest period and so on. And Jews were considered to be the authorities in astrology by the early Byzantine Christians. But in the medieval period, it was frowned upon by Maimonides and other rabbis in order to protect Jews from accusations of witchcraft. So regular Judaism got into a thing of, hey, let's pretend like we have nothing to do with any of this stuff, and only those weird Kabbalistic rabbis can do this in secret in their homes and all this sort of thing. Nostradamus, Jewish family, was an expert in astrology and all the other geomantic sciences. When we study Nostradamus, we'll find out just how much he was. Even today in Judaism, we say Mazel Tov. Most people don't know that's astrology. They're saying have good stars, a good astrological sign for you. Mazel Tov. So that brings us to the topic of Kabbalah. Kabbalah is an oral tradition. It's advanced spiritual teachings that are transmitted orally from the mouth of a master who is a practicing, not an operational master, not just a scholarly master, to the ear of a student. Now the MERKABAH mystics, who did ascent to the eighth heaven, so to speak, to the throne of God, they never taught classes, but once in a lifetime, you can read in Talmud and other places how they might meet another practitioner and they would instantly know it and they would discuss this mystic practice. It's very, very secretive and hardly done. In several of the places in the traditions about Yeshua, about Jesus, we see examples that make it very clear that that kind of mysticism is being practiced. When Paul says, I know a man who ascended to the third heaven, but he's talking about himself. He's bragging at that particular point and so on. Or when the disciples are taken in a group of three up into a mountain, and all of a sudden they see Jesus talking to Moses and Elijah and things like that. This is the practice of MERKABAH mysticism. Now, it was legitimate in these traditions for Kabbalah for students to write down what they remember, but not to give it out to the public. And so the earliest book we have that was written at the time of Jesus, which is, what is that? Sefer Yetzirah, yeah, a basic Kabbalistic book. But it's only 1,000 years later that there start to be mystic communities where they actually do a whole lot of Kabbalistic writing, and that's where most of modern Kabbalah is known from, but it has a much more ancient root. An example of a Kabbalistic master would be Jesus and his disciples. Advanced students might be initiated in what was called the gate of the teacher. Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was his most advanced student. If you read the Gospel of Mary, or if you read my seminar on Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Mary, she was clearly his most advanced student. She was taken through an initiation that is very much like the Hermetic initiation I just showed you. I'm also going to comment that it's very hard for you to find true Kabbalah. There's all kinds of Hollywood stars that are studying with certain rabbis and things like that. But probably the greatest Kabbalistic teacher, in my opinion, in the last 100 years was Rabbi Theon, who was a teacher of Madame Blavatsky and the founder of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor in 1870. He was also the teacher of Mira Alfasa, who was the mother, who was the person who was the partner of Sri Aurobindo. This is Max Theon. He and his wife Alma accepted Mira Alfasa as a student in 1905, and she went on to become one of the great spiritual leaders in India. This is a sketch of Mira at that age. She became the mother. This is a picture of her and Sri Aurobindo, very, very revered people and connected with theosophy and so on. That was her earliest introduction into this kind of understanding of things was through Max Theon and his Kabbalistic things. I have a friend who traveled extensively, a Jewish friend, who told me that now I could get a hold of the teachings of Max Theon as remembered by his disciple Thamanlus, and the fellow had a bookstore in Jerusalem now had these things and had published small little private groups, and I waited for 3 years for him to answer for this bookstore owner to answer my mail, and he finally just all of a sudden one day in the mail showed up the book, and it was translated to English. So I have the actual, what's left of, historically, the teachings of Max Theon, and some of my students want it. I've given copies of it to them before, but I haven't explained much about it. I may do a seminar on it. But true Kabbalah is not concerned with just making a lot of funny little drawings and doing kind of, talking about trees and things like that. It's about the development of the soul and development of Kabbalistic groups and people in those groups, and it's very much more than anything that you would find in bookstores today. Now, in Kabbalistic teaching at the time of Yeshua, divinity was understood to be androgynous, just like the original Adam had been before he was separated into sexes. You might recall that when Jesus is asked by the Sadducees who want to trap him, saying, well, here's a woman whose first husband died, and then her second husband died, and all the way down to the seventh husband, whose wife will she be if there really is such a thing as a resurrection like you claim? How could she be the wife of 7 people? That would violate Scripture. And Jesus said, you don't understand very much, do you? Because those who are worthy to achieve the kima, which is the Jewish word for resurrection, continuity of consciousness, they are neither given in marriage, nor do they give in marriage, but they are like the angels. In other words, they're androgynous. You don't get married. You're nobody's wife when you do that. So the real concepts, for example, of the angels, the archangels, is androgynous. So you will find drawings, and this is a modern one I can find on the internet, of the angels as 2 beings in one, a male part and a female part, because the angels are complete, they're perfect. If you go to other traditions of divine beings, for example, Tibetan Buddhism, all the divine beings are always in Yab-Yum. There's a consort, whether it's a goddess with her consort male or a god with his consort female, they never appear separately. This is the way that the deities are presented, because they represent not people, they're represented as a male and a female in sacred intercourse, in ecstasy, but that's simply a way of representing it. So the first thing you have to understand is that divine beings are androgynous. God is a male and a female. God had a wife. God had a female consort. If you read Raphael Patai's wonderful book called The Hebrew Goddess, you can learn an awful lot more about that too. But in Kabbalistic traditions, it is incumbent upon the wife and the husband to fool around during the time of Shabbat. And you can explain it more to me. I think you can explain more. But because it was considered to be, yeah, because God is a mother and God is a father, and God as a father is transcendent, and as a mother is very close, and is called was known to Yeshua as what was later called the Holy Spirit. And of course, the Holy Spirit is in Hebrew is a term that is feminine, Ruach HaKodesh. And Jesus said, anyone who sins against the Holy Spirit, I'll kick your butt, because he was very, very defensive about it. And as a mystic, he was very involved in that, because the Holy Spirit was the feminine side of God that taught people, was close and was immanent. And you can read about it in the books of the wisdom tradition, about Chachma, as she's called sometimes. But she's the one who actually teaches. God the Father is the transcendent being who sort of steps back and does this sort of thing. But there are 2 parts. There's the male part of deity and the female part of deity. And this is in Kabbalah. there were many prophets like Elijah and Isaiah and so on who ascended to the throne of God in what was called the MERKABAH, which was an interior vehicle. MERKABAH is the throne chariot of God. And I go much more deeply into this in the wisdom seminars on Yeshua, the unknown Jesus. But basically, the idea that one would make an ascent to the highest of worlds in order to commune and get a word as a prophet, to get a mission as a prophet, etc., was part of what the deepest form of Hebrew prophetic mysticism was all about. The form of MERKABAH mysticism by the 2nd, 3rd centuries had changed in what we call HEKHALOTH mysticism. It gotten so there have been more people that were working on this kind of meditation, and but it was still considered to be highly secretive and very dangerous. You can read lots of remarks about it. Again, I cover it more in detail in other seminars. But basically, when you get into the highest parts, then you have to go through all these dangerous places and lakes, and then you can get into the halls, and you can get lost in the halls, etc. People very often we're told that we're not pure enough for doing this, would go crazy trying to do this sort of thing. And it became HEKHALOTH mysticism, this much longer practice that was done. And that was involved ascending. Now, what do you think ascends? A person doesn't levitate, he doesn't go up into the sky. Here's what ascends. And this is the very same kind of practices that we do in other kinds of yogic practices. We are bringing things up into our highest self, our higher nature, in our own microcosm. And so the practice of ascent was a yogic kind of practice. We would understand it today that way because we don't understand a lot about what was done in the ancient world. But basically, I'm reading to you. Rabbi Shimon spoke unto his companion and said, "How long shall we abide in the condition of one column by itself?" This is from the Zohar. But there are many, many kinds of practices. I took that from a Kabbalistic group in Los Angeles. Now, the book Sefer Yetzirah was written about the time of Jesus. And there are attributions to the Hebrew letters that creates a kind of tree. Well, scholars know that this is written in the first 2 centuries. We also know that Luria, 1,000 years later, is credited with the design of the Kabbalistic tree, the 10 Sephirot. But in the New Testament, when a blind man is healed by Jesus, he says, "I see men as trees walking." And we have many other kinds of indications that there was mystical knowledge at this time. So probably even the Kabbalistic tree goes back to the time of Sefer Yetzirah. This is an unfallen tree. This is the 10 Sephirot, the 3 supernals on the top. We don't count. There are really seven steps to heaven here. And these are not steps one goes to. This represents God, or the triune God. And the highest of these right here, the highest of this is Kether, which is crown, but the highest of this is Tifereth, which is heart. And this is I've shown these connections related to a pack of tarot cards that are properly attributed, which none of them are today, but because we use this for some practices that we do.
There
But
are some that are fake.
there are some that have all these attributions?
Yeah, the Grand Tarot Esoterical, I think
It has the right letters? Yeah. What happened in our good friend Bishop Christine Payne Tower, who's the tarot guru on AOL, she's the person who made quite a big issue about the fact that these attributions were corrupted by the time of the Golden Dawn. But we talk about that stuff later in another segment. Anyway, this is the ideal image of God, so to speak. This is one graphical representation of an ideal of what the image of God is. And this is, I'm going to show it to you now when we come back. The image of God is also thought of as is put together by the Kabbalists in this way, where they have Yod, He, Vav, He, the tetragrammaton, put together and form a human shape. That is mankind. The image of God is what we are. The mystical heavens are of ascent are well, originally were not attributed to astrological heavens, and then they got kind of all mixed up. This is in medieval Arabic Sufism. This is a manuscript from that that's been translated into to English, because there was a great deal of relationship between Sufi mysticism and a lot of Kabbalistic mysticism. But here we have the first elemental sphere, the first inorganic world, etc., all these spheres, and then finally there's the human kingdom and the animal kingdoms, and then all the way up to the Empyrean and so on. These are ideas that developed about the internal structure of humans and the human soul, and they developed not just among Jews, but they developed later among Christians and also among Arabs. The Zohar, which was written now 1,000 years after this early period, it's the first written Kabbalah after Sefer Yetzirah, and this appears in medieval Europe. And remember, Kabbalah means private oral teaching, so when you start having somebody writing it down and publishing it, it's a whole different deal. Here, Adam Kadmon, the primordial humanity, is described in detail. We talked about Adam Kadmon before. And he is an image of God. He is a tangible image of God, not incarnate in our world, but as the Son of God. By the way, Cairo Ganitza, a lot of treasure stuff from Cairo that I translated, preserves what we call the Sefer Haratzim, the Book of the Mysteries, which are traditions from Hellenistic period showing Kabbalistic magic and MERKABAH, HEKHALOTH stuff and everything. I translated that. That's on my site. You can download that if you ever want to study it. It shows a lot more of this kind of stuff, and nothing much about this has been published by other scholars. The scholar who found it, put it together, died before he had a chance to finish it, and I was able to get a hold of it. So Adam Kadmon, the original Adam in the Kabbalistic mysteries, has two faces. He has a greater face, which is called macroprosopus in the Greek, and a lesser divine face, microprosopus, which is what will become related to what we call the microcosmos. And in the world of Absoluth is where he lives. And this is a wonderful diagram that was done by Eliphas Levi, showing the Jewish interlinked triangles, which is also a symbol of many other things. And the reflection of here's God, here's the face of God reflected. The idea that that's what we are as microcosms. We are the reflection of deity. And so the God in his greater face is called the Arik Anpin, the vast countenance, or the macrocosm, and the human soul is known as the Zir Anpin, the lesser countenance. And when we say, may the divine face shine upon you, we're using Kabbalistic language, and even though in modern Hebrew synagogues they probably don't know too much about that, but Anpin is the divine face. The divine face of God, and every little detail of that face was cataloged by the Kabbalists. Every hair of the beard had something meaningful, and all this kind of, it's all part of the macrocosm. So now, let's talk about the fallen human tree. Humanity after the fall into incarnation, after Adam Kadmon has now become divided into two sexes and become thrown out of paradise and all this sort of thing. These speak about relationships within the incarnate human soul. So the only Kabbalistic trees of life you will ever see, from Lurian, Kabbalah, and so on, the Ots Haim, will be the fallen tree. Let's take a look at the difference. Now here is the unfallen tree. We notice that Tifereth is here, and at the very center is of the heart, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 channels coming into it, as does Yesod, which is with us associated with our sexual organs. They have 6 channels, okay? Now, the fallen human tree that is used in Kabbalah today, 8 channels coming into it. Everything is prolapsed. This is Malkuth. This is our world, our state of existence. It's isolated. Yesod has changed entirely. It has 4 channels. Both of these, all this, to be redeemed, this all has to move here. This is what redemption is. The idea of redemption of the human soul. I can't go too much far. This is just a survey course, but I'm just showing you these things. And so this is the most isolated of the whole thing, Portal Malkuth. Malkuth is where the world we live in. We're isolated from God. We're separated from deity. We're wandering around in this kind of way. So how did the descent or fall of primordial mankind into matter occur Kabbalistically? Well, the original divine world is a world of Absoluth. It was from the Ein Sof Hour. Originally there is light. God creates light, and then the light becomes infinite light and creates space. And what everything begins with is Ein, nothing. There's nothing at all, and then there's light, and then there's space. And then into that space, God projects into this space the beginning, the seed of the worlds, and the seed of the macrocosm. And I'm showing now the fallen form. So here's Adam Kadmon. And the world of Absoluth. Absoluth means nearness, and that's what it means. It's very close to God. And Adam Kadmon is the original human. And that's where we have macroprosopus and microprosopus. But now another world is created, and it flows out of this world. It's called Beriah. What happens is that the Tifereth of Absoluth becomes the Kether, the head of this new world, of Beriah. Beriah is another understanding of where the throne of God is and where the Messiah is and so on. And so Tifereth becomes Kether, and Metatron and the archangels are in this level of reality. And then we have the world of Yetzirah, yet another level down, the world of formation. And these are where the myriad angels are, and in earlier versions, Metatron and the archangels were in this world. And there are various planetary dominions and so on. And then finally, the world of Asiya. The world of Asiya is, now we're getting close to where we live, but we're not there yet, quite. It's the world of becoming. And it's where the angels and the demons of punishment live, and there are 10 levels of ancient MERKABAH ascent through this world. And it's sub-spiritual. So psychic worlds are here, and there's a physical world here, and that thing I've just encircled is Malkuth. That's us. That's our universe. That's everything we can see through our telescopes. That's everything we can find on the earth. That's the physical world. That's the part of it that we're in. So in MERKABAH ascent, the MERKABAH mystic would go up about this far, and he would have an image of an image of an image. And there are 7 earths, 7 hells, and the Klipot. And the Klipot are the negative forces, dark forces that were released when the original 10 Sephirot had to be cracked open and broken open in order for them to commune with each other and have a relationship. And then those shards, those broken parts, are the dark forces that always are of necessity in any kind of created world. The world has to have light and darkness, just like the Masonic checkerboard floor with the light squares and the dark squares. The world is this way. And it's not all dark, it's not all light, but it's checkerboard. And the Klipot, in modern Jewish weddings, people will take crystal glass and they'll crush it and go bang. And that means that they're opening up the relationship between them and knowing that there may be a lot of hard things that have to be done in order to truly communicate. So this was transmitted to the European Christians and became the Christian KABBALAH. Notice how we spell it very differently. Christian KABBALAH. And the one thing that was done with mystics was the creation of a new Sephirot that is kind of a phantom Sephirot called Da'at. So that in this world that we live in, this is this is the holding place for Tiferet. This is when perfection is achieved. This tells everybody where to go, right here. And it's also known as the Bach Kol, the voice of the Holy Spirit, the voice of God. Here's some books I might recommend if you're interested in studying. This will be up on the internet, but some of Moshe Idel, Aryeh Kaplan, Halevi, it's very good. Here are some others for those of you that go on want to study. I recommend some of these books on Kabbalah. This is the easiest guy to read, Halevi. Real good way to get introduced to Kabbalah if you never have studied much of it before. So in the 7th to 11th centuries, we had the flowering of Islamic civilization, and they based very much of what they did on astrology and Kabbalistic ideas. And the Hermetic sciences were discovered and understood as they had taken over Egypt, and especially the area we now call Akhmin, which is Panopolis. And so all the wisdom of the pagans went to the Arabs. And the Christians went on a different road, and they didn't really have it except in the underground traditions, which we call the Grail tradition. So the last little bit I'm going to show you is a little bit about the development of astrology in medieval Europe. It became the basis for medicine and anatomy and a whole lot of other things. I'm going to show you one little clip and we'll be done here.
Though astrology was frowned upon by Christianity, over the centuries belief in the power of the stars steadily grew. By the Middle Ages, astrology was part of the curriculum taught at European universities. Rulers often based decisions of state on astrologers' advice. In the 15th and 16th centuries, Europe witnessed an unrivaled flowering of art, science, and exploration. In this period of cultural ferment, astrology flourished.
Okay, so the Western mystery tradition developed through many kinds of ways. A lot of it was underground through the European Holy Grail schools. They continued to use this pagan cosmology. The Christian and Catholic and Orthodox churches staunchly maintained their three-storied universe. But eventually the church would lose out in the Copernican revolution when it was finally had to be admitted that the universe, or what we would think of as a solar system, was heliocentric and the world was spherical and not flat. So the ideas you find in Dante's Divine Comedy about, well, if you go up high enough in the sky, you're going to find angels and all this kind of stuff, that was accepted for a long, long time and thought to be the way it was, and demons down below. But the understanding that the Earth was the third planet out and the Sun was what everything went around eventually is what became standard in European astronomy and astrology. And astrology was used to measure periods of time, which were ruled by planets and signs. And so you couldn't make a medicine unless you did the right astrological sign, the right astrological plant. You couldn't make a talisman, you couldn't make magical things. And the days of the week, which were attributed to the planets, Sunday to the sun, Sol, and Monday to the moon, etc. Same thing is done in Vedic astrology. Were very important times. The time when the sun rose was the time that planet of that day would rule, and it would all roll around in such a way that over the cycle of 24 hours, as the times of the day that were ruled by the various planets and so on would come around, the next day would roll around to the next day's planet and so on. There got to be several systems of this. Will and I studied alchemy with quite a good alchemist who used one particular system of it, but we found out that there were several and many that were used by other people. This became basic for making medicine if you were a doctor, and any kind of herbs, and came to times and seasons of the moon for planting things, new moons and things like this. So now, those of you that have been doing this with me, we've looked at what has happened for the transmission of the Greek initiatic and the Pythagorean mysteries and the Egyptian Hermetic sciences into Europe through Islam and Jewish esoteric schools. And what has happened to the Kabbalah as it went through the Middle Ages, the Lyrian Kabbalah, about 800 years ago, is it's emerged as modern Jewish Kabbalah as we know it today, the kind you can read about in bookstores. And it bred and spawned off a whole section we call Christian Kabbalah, which became really important to the alchemical tradition in Western Europe. And that and the Hermetic sciences spawned what we call the European Hermetic Renaissance, which is the part of the topic of one of our next modules, where we will be looking at the Gnostic communities in the medieval period, the Knights Templar, the Goetia, the magical traditions, alchemy, the Rosicrucian Enlightenment, and a whole lot of other kinds of things.